Let me invite Kane Thornton to share some insights from an industry perspective. Thanks very much, Kane.
Don, thanks very much for the earlier introduction, and also to the Institute for the invitation to speak tonight. As Don introduced, I'm going to provide, I guess, a bit of a focus on the impact of carbon trading on the Australian energy sector. I'm going to start off with a quick introduction of a quick status check of the renewable energy industry within Australia. I'll then outline what I believe are the key outcomes or the ultimate objectives, the transformation necessary within the Australian energy sector. And then I'm going to assess both the carbon pollution reduction scheme and also just touch on the opposition's climate change policy and assess those against the very objectives that we're aspiring towards. Firstly, a quick overview of Hydro Tasmania and why they're interested in these public policy debates. Hydro Tasmania is Australia's largest producer of renewable energy, around about $5.2 billion worth of assets, predominantly hydropower within Tasmania. I guess on that basis, hydropower produces around about 5% of Australia's current energy supply. And I think despite our best efforts to improve the efficiency of the existing generation to get more energy out of the assets we have, there's no certainty that will continue into the future. We're already seeing a long-term reduction, losing about 10% of our inflows into the system over the last 30 years. And I think it's quite clear that this is consistent with the likely impacts of climate change, particularly in Tasmania. We're also joint venture owners of Roaring Forties, which is a major wind developer. Roaring Forties own and operate a number of wind farms both in Tasmania and throughout Australia, and also have a fairly large pipeline of projects ready to go. And it's, I guess that pipeline involves many hundreds of wind turbines worth many millions of dollars. But I think what's very clear, and it'll be the focus of my presentation tonight, is that those projects will only occur if we've got the right policy environment. We also own an electricity retailer, Momentum Energy. So as I said, I'm going to start with a status check of renewable energy in Australia, and unfortunately it's a pretty depressing sight. It's quite clear that if Australia is to achieve our emission reduction targets, whether it be the 5%, 15% or even 25%, renewable energy is going to have to play a fairly significant role. As this graph shows, over the last 30 years, in fact, the level of renewable energy, or the portion of renewable energy in Australia, has actually declined. Now, that's largely because the amount of generation has stood still while the demand has increased. The former Howard government first introduced a renewable energy target back in 2001, and that was an attempt to really try and turn this trend around. The policy at the time was very effective in driving in new investment in renewable energy. We can see there that the decline certainly flattened off, and I guess now we see a commitment to an increased renewable energy target, the 20% target by 2020, and that's the blue line there on that graph. But as I'll go into in a bit more detail later on, that there's some really serious problems with the policy as it stands at the moment. As Ross touched on earlier, there's no doubt Australia has got some really massive renewable energy resources right around the country, and I think with the right policy environment, it's not whether or not Australia will achieve a 20% target by 2020, but it's actually which technologies will deliver us there. Of course, there are natural constraints on all of these technologies, things like access to the technology itself, issues of transmission, issues of planning. But I think it's quite clear that the potential is there. And here's just a few numbers to give you a sense of what I see as the benefits of increasing Australia's renewable energy, even to 20% by 2020. Energy security, obviously, with a more diverse portfolio of different technologies distributed around the country, jobs in rural and regional Australia, investment, and of course a fairly substantial amount of greenhouse gas abatement. But I think when we put Australia's massive renewable energy resource into an international context, our current level of generation is actually quite low, less than 10% in fact, and even doubling it by 2020 to 20% produces a fairly modest result, particularly compared to the world average. And I think what's quite clear is that many of the other countries listed on this graph aren't standing still. They've got quite ambitious renewable energy policies themselves. So I think Australia certainly has a lot of potential, but we've got a long, long way to go. Before I get to carbon trading, I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the investment case for renewable energy projects. So wind, along with hydropower upgrades and biomass projects, is currently seen as the lowest cost of the proven renewable energy technologies. Sorry, I've gone one too far. I'll get to that one in a minute. A wind farm produces electricity. That electricity can be sold onto the wholesale energy market for around about $40 at today's prices. Now, that $40 is effectively set by fossil fuel coal-fired power stations. The challenge we've got is that a wind farm to be commercial actually requires total revenue closer to $100. So we get $40 for the energy, but we require around about $100 per megawatt hour to commercialise the project. So to encourage investment in renewable energy projects, we need government intervention in the market as it stands at the moment. And they can do one of two things. They can either increase the cost of fossil fuel-based generation by putting a price on emissions, and possibly alongside of that, they can also provide additional incentive for renewable energy. I think it's clear that attracting investment in clean energy ultimately requires investment-grade policy to address this price barrier. It also has to be internationally competitive to attract international capital, and it needs to be long-term. These projects require at least 15 years' worth of investment certainty to make them commercial. And I think if Australia puts that sort of policy in place, it's quite clear that the credit crunch won't impact renewable energy projects. I think financiers are happy to lend to projects which have long-term policy certainty, and obviously will play a key role in empowering Australia's future. I'll now get to carbon trading. There's obviously been a lot of debate about the design of an ETS in Australia over the past years, and unfortunately most of this debate regularly loses sight of the ultimate outcomes that need to be achieved. I think the debates generally focus too much on the means rather than the ends. If Australia is to transition to a lower emissions energy sector, we must achieve a major transformation in the way we both consume and the way we produce electricity in Australia. And I think there are 5 critical objectives or outcomes that we need to achieve. The first one, demand-side response to reduce our energy consumption, to drive energy efficiency right throughout the economy, and also to support some domestic-scale renewable energy. The second one, deploying large-scale proven renewable energy technologies, and this must include maximising the contribution from our existing renewable energy assets. We need to, thirdly, deploy gas and other low-emission generation sources. Obviously, gas in particular will play a pretty key role in the future in supporting some of the more intermittent renewable energy sources. Fourthly, we need to develop new technology and ensure we have a broader suite at even lower costs in the future. I think it's clear that private sector will take market risk with proven technologies, but we need government to support investment in early stage development, which includes greater technology and greater cost risks. And finally, and most controversially, we need to phase out the most carbon intensive generation. I think society demands a secure energy supply, so to a large degree the pace at which we phase out the most carbon intensive generation will be dictated by the pace and the extent to which we achieve the other 4 objectives. But I wanted to emphasise that I see this as the end game. These 5 outcomes are critical. It requires major transformation, and there will be really tough decisions to be made. There will be winners and there will be losers. The transformation requires a number of policies that I'll touch on shortly, but a price on carbon emissions provides the absolute foundation. It touches all of those objectives. I wanted to just explore a few factors that I see as critical that have again been lost in the debate about how Australia should achieve our emission reduction targets. Firstly, the benefits of a cap and trade approach over other designs have been well established. I personally have been part of many reviews into climate change policy over many years, starting with the state and territory-led National Emissions Trading Task Force. the previous Howard government's task group, the Garnaut review, and most recently the Labor government's design of the CPRS. And each of these processes consistently found that a cap-and-trade emissions trading scheme should be the central policy by which Australia reduces its emissions. I don't think we need any more reviews. It's no surprise that a cap-and-trade emissions trading scheme now exists or is in development in many countries around the world. So on that basis, I think the fundamental design is correct. It may not be perfect, but we can improve it in the future. We can debate the cap and the levels of compensation forever, and in fact, I think that'll be an ongoing debate. It'll never end. Personally, I'm quite tired of debating the merits of a cap-and-trade emissions trading scheme, so I'll refer you simply to Malcolm Turnbull's most recent parliamentary speech. And I think this is just another example of the irony that surrounds the current political debate. There are some commentators currently pointing at the supposed political corruption of the government's carbon pollution reduction scheme as a rationale for now introducing a carbon tax. And in my view, this simply confuses politics with policy. A carbon tax, in my view, could be subject to the same political pressures, could result in a low carbon price and exemption of all of the same or key industries. So I thought we'd now quickly take a look at what role the proposed carbon pollution reduction scheme could play in transforming the energy sector against those 5 key outcomes. Firstly, demand-side response, and clearly by increasing the cost of electricity, consumers will be encouraged to explore ways to use less and be more efficient. But I think it's clear that price alone won't be enough. There are many barriers to energy efficiency, both at an individual level and also at a commercial level. We need policies that overcome all of these barriers. As I said earlier, large-scale renewable energy projects require some policy support to bridge the $50 to $60 gap between wholesale energy prices and the cost of these projects. I think it's clear that it'll be some time before we see a carbon price in the order of $50 to $60. And for that reason, the Australian Government's Renewable Energy Target Scheme remains and continues to be critical to underpin renewable energy projects. But as I alluded to earlier, there are some significant issues as a result of the many overlapping state and Commonwealth policies in place at present, particularly those that are incentivising domestic scale technology. The renewable energy target is currently being flooded by domestic technologies, squeezing out large-scale renewable energy projects. I want to be clear here that we need more solar hot water and we need more solar panels, but we also need large-scale renewable energy, and the current policy isn't delivering that. For me personally, I think for all of us, it should be a real concern that it's been 5 years since we've had a strong investment signal for major investment in renewable energy in Australia. The good news is that the problem has now been recognised by all sides of politics. A commitment's been made to finding and supporting a solution, and I'm just concerned and hope that we'll find an effective one quickly. Moving back to the CPRS, I think even a modest carbon price is likely to be enough to support the low emission generation of the future. Encouraging new technology, I think a carbon price won't directly facilitate more R&D in energy technology. It is important, however, to send a signal to R&D investors that clean technologies will be in demand and rewarded in the future. Of course, many emissions trading schemes around the world allocate some level of revenue towards renewable energy R&D. Unfortunately, this isn't currently proposed within Australia. And finally, a price on carbon is intended to increase the cost of fossil fuel-based generation and support a transition to cleaner technologies. The rate at which this occurs is highly dependent on both the carbon price and the level of compensation provided to those generators. So further complementary policies will also be required, particularly in the early stages of the scheme when the carbon price is expected to be low. This brings me to the Coalition's direct action policy. For the sake of time, I'll ignore a couple of important yet very contentious factors. Firstly, the extent to which it does or does not deliver the environmental outcomes the Coalition are claiming. And secondly, the ultimate cost of the scheme. I did want to note, I studied environmental economics here at Melbourne University quite a number of years ago, and the polluter pays principle was a simple and fundamental principle that I personally was immediately attracted to, both on the grounds of efficiency and also equity. The Coalition appear to have moved away from this fairly simple principle. We'll just quickly compare the Coalition's policy against the same energy sector outcomes. It's very unclear what this policy will do to encourage widespread energy efficiency or renewable energy, or in fact drive the broader transition of the energy sector. There is no clear indication of what happens beyond 2020 with their current policy. And as I said earlier, power station investments require 15 to 30 years worth of investment certainty, so that's obviously quite problematic. The opposition's climate change policy was titled Soil and Solar, but it commits just $100 million per year to renewable energy. That's about 1/4 of one wind farm per year. As I said earlier, we do need a range of direct action measures, the likes of which are proposed by the Coalition, but they should complement, not replace, a price on carbon. Having said that, we've certainly seen some of the challenges for any government in implementing the apparently simple direct action policies over the past weeks. I'm nearly finished, and I haven't mentioned Copenhagen once. While it has been important clearly in the domestic political dynamic, it makes minimal direct difference to the Australian energy sector. What does make a difference is if and when the Australian industry faces the cost of their carbon emissions. Exactly when this will occur is anyone's guess, but there are a few key factors. Most critical will be the extent to which the voting population both understand the seriousness of climate change as well as the merits of an emissions trading scheme to achieve meaningful and least cost abatement. In my view, we need greater effort to explain the merits and impacts of an emissions trading scheme, not just from Malcolm Turnbull. We need leadership by our business and community leaders to promote the benefits of a price on carbon, and for the community and individuals to continue to demonstrate what can be done. I think, for me personally, this has been one of the great sources of inspiration over the past years. There are many examples of great success in individuals, communities and businesses changing and reducing their own emissions. Average Australians doing what are now quite ordinary things, as illustrated here. Organisations like the Alternative Technology Association continue to play a crucial role in providing the inspiration and the practical advice for ordinary people to continue to make a difference. But unfortunately, the changes that individuals can make are not alone likely to be enough. We need clear, strong and long-term policy to mobilise investment and commence the transformation of the Australian energy sector. A carbon price is fundamental to this. But as I said earlier, a range of additional policies will also be key to achieve a secure and low-cost energy supply with a much lower carbon footprint. I believe that Australia can harness the massive power of industry and capital markets to start mining our renewable energy resources at least as ferociously as we are currently mining our mineral resources. The science is saying that we must act. We know we have the technology and the resources. We now just require the political will. But let's be clear, this isn't just about the environment or energy security. It's about Australia's position in the global economy. Thank you.
Ross, Robin, Jeremy and Kane, thank you so much for your time and contribution.